Hello and welcome to our webinar this evening where you will learn more about the proposed changes to the way Ofsted inspects. This session will be recorded and will be shared after the event. My name is Denise Olander. I'm the Senior HMI on the Inspection Improvement team, and I'd like to introduce my colleagues who will also be speaking and answering your questions this evening. So we have Andrea Shepherd, who is the Senior HMI for Teacher Development Policy, Richard Bynan, Senior HMI for FES Policy,
Hi folks.
and Andrea Dill-Russell, who is the Senior HMI for Further Education and Skills.
Afternoon, everyone.
And finally, we have Anne Monaghan, who is the Specialist Advisor for FES in the Inspection Improvement team, and will be kindly coordinating the questions that you pose in the final part of the webinar. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. So we're going to switch off our cameras now to help people's bandwidth, but you will see us towards the end when we will be answering your questions. And thank you for those of you who are attending today. We have over 1,500 delegates signed up for this session. So let's begin with a quick outline of the session. The first part of the webinar will give you some information on our consultation and proposals, and in particular, what the potential changes mean for further education and skills. We will explore the proposed new report card, education inspection toolkit, and inspection methodology. We will follow this up with question and answer session, and many of you have already kindly submitted questions in advance of the webinar. To set the scene, I'll first provide some context on the background to the consultation that was taking place. We want to build a better Ofsted. We want to make sure Ofsted is a modern, world-class inspectorate and regulator, fit for purpose and trusted by parents and carers and by the learners and the professionals we work with. We want to reset our priorities, we want to refine our practices, and we want to rebuild our relationships. Since the tragic death of head teacher Ruth Perry 2 years ago, there has been a long and loud debate about Ofsted. Much of that debate centred on the impact inspections have on the professionals who educate and train our learners and apprentices. In response, we have introduced a raft of reforms with a focus on the welfare of staff. Then we ran our Big Listen, which was the largest consultation in Ofsted's history, with over 22,000 responses, which included 4,300 from children and young people. Your responses gave us a chance to reset our priorities, refine our practices, and rebuild our relationships. This consultation looks to build on these reforms with a new way of inspecting and grading all education providers, from early years, through schools, to further education and teacher development. We want to retain the trust of the apprentices, learners and parents we work for, and regain the confidence of the dedicated professionals we work with. We believe the proposals we have set out will help us achieve that. So what do we want to achieve? We want to improve how it feels to be inspected, while continuing to encourage and support providers to raise standards. We will work with leaders to determine the areas of inspection focus and agree the most appropriate activities tailored to the specific provider. We all have a desire to work for all apprentices and learners so that they receive a high quality of education and training. An education that enables everyone to thrive and, of course, achieve great outcomes. We want to reform our early years, schools, further education and skills, and initial teacher education frameworks to respond to what we heard in the Big Listen, to ensure that we are rooting our assessment of provider quality in the development, well-being, experiences, and outcomes of apprentices and learners. A focus on outcomes will of course include published data. However, these outcomes go beyond the achievement data. It includes whether learners and apprentices develop detailed knowledge, skills and behaviours, that they are ready for their next steps and for life beyond the provider, and that the provider is a safe and positive environment where learners and apprentices thrive and get the support they need. We know that much of the work of settings is not evident in published outcomes. We want to introduce clearer criteria for our inspections, giving clearer indications of quality and supporting learners to use as part of their continuous improvement journey. We want to make sure that the inspection process is more collaborative, with constructive, professional dialogue between leaders and inspectors. And we want to tailor the inspection process and criteria to the education provider, phase and type, and we will be cognizant of the settings context. We're now in the consultation phase and we're actively looking to hear your views. The changes we are engaging and consulting on are relevant to all providers which are currently inspected under the Education Inspection Framework. The formal consultation opened on the 3rd of February and will close after 12 weeks on the 28th of April. Inspection test visits are taking place now, and pilot inspections will take place until the summer, and we will introduce our renewed inspections in the autumn term for early years, schools, further education providers including colleges, adult education, independent learning providers, employer providers, independent specialist colleges, ITE. Just one note, the ITE inspections will begin from January 2026. So having outlined what the consultation is about, I'm now going to hand over to my colleague, Andrea Shepherd.
Thank you, Denise. And this evening, I am going to speak to you about our proposals. What we are proposing are inspections that look and feel different for everybody. A collaborative and a transparent approach to inspection. And we want to do our bit to help providers to be places where staff and learners thrive and where there is high quality, inclusive education for every child, every pupil and every learner. We want to see those great outcomes for everyone, including those with SEND or those who are disadvantaged. And we want clear and accessible reporting that helps everyone understand the quality of the provision. We want to build on the positive aspects of the current inspection framework, for instance, the focus on curriculum. We are proposing to conduct inspections in a way that, as I said before, looks and feels different, that promotes professional conversation and collaboration, that starts with the premise that everyone is working within the legal expectations and professional frameworks expected of them, understands and accounts for the unique context in which you work and have made decisions, seeks to build a rounded picture of what you do, always seeking to find out what it's typically like to work, learn and care in your individual settings, accepts that there will always be some aspects of what you do that are better and more developed than others, and promotes a self-improving system that is inclusive of all and drives high and raising standards. There are then proposed changes, of course, that impact all remits. And these are the new report cards with a 5-point scale of exemplary, strong, secure, attention needed and causing concern. The toolkits provide guidance on what inspectors will be looking for and the evidence they will be gathering. All inspections will start by discussing the provider's work against the secure column and then seeing what that looks like on the ground. Inspectors and leaders in discussions will begin to broaden their evidence and the way that their gathering of that across the remainder of the inspection. Before coming on to site, we will continue to use an initial conversation to build those productive relationships and to understand the context and the strengths of the provision, as well as those areas that leaders are working on. And in determining the overall evaluation for each toolkit, the quality of leadership of the area and the extent of inclusive practice will take precedent. We want to make sure that we're reporting using an accessible format, one that can be read on tablets and phones, and that we provide clear information for parents, carers, and the sectors we inspect. We want to be able to share our reporting using an accessible format, and we're looking at how that can be read on tablets and phones, etc. And we want to make sure that those reports are easy to navigate to find the information that is required. And we want to know what will be the most helpful way to design reports for different audiences. The inspection information will be in 3 parts. And we've got the inspection framework, which will give the why we inspect. And this will be the overarching document that sets out the legal basis, the purpose, and the rationale for inspection across all provider types and remits. We will also then have an operating guide, which gives the how, the information on how to inspect a provider, and how the specific remit toolkit will apply in different settings. And this will be a technical guide for the inspectors and actually will replace parts 1 and 2 of the current handbook. And there'll be one for each remit. And then we will have the toolkits. This is the what the inspectors and the provision leaders will use to encourage professional dialogue when considering the evaluation areas and reaching the different grades. This will replace our current grade descriptors, part 3 of the handbook. And there will be a toolkit for each of our remits. Each toolkit will comprise a number of evaluation areas, including secure, that reflects what makes great provision. There will be a toolkit for each of our remits, and each toolkit will comprise a number of evaluation areas. And I will now pass over to my colleague Richard, who will go through the proposals specifically for further education and skills in more detail.
Hi folks. So some of the detail then about what these proposals mean for further education and skills. There are many things that we're going to continue to do that we've done for many years and through many frameworks with further education and skills. For example, we'll continue having a nominee, and the nominee will play a central part in the inspection as currently. We'll try to conduct inspection activity together with staff in the providers, wherever that's possible. We do understand that, people have got jobs to do and time is tight for some people in organisations. They can't always be accompanying us to everything we do, but where it's possible, we encourage that. We'll grade the contribution to meeting skills needs as we do at the moment on enhanced inspections. We'll continue to do that. That won't apply to any provider except for colleges, sixth form colleges and designated institutions. But for those 3 types of provider we'll carry on with that skills evaluation. And we'll continue to grade leadership at whole provider level. Currently, we call it leadership management. We will grade leadership at the top whole provider level under the new arrangements. So those things are staying the same. What are we going to change? Well, first of all, the skills nominee on enhanced inspections, that's for colleges, for sixth form colleges and designated institutions, that person will now be relabeled, as it were, the shadow nominee. We have shadow nominees in independent learning provider inspections and large and complex inspections. So we're bringing that across into the what was the enhanced inspection space. So we'll still have a shadow nominee, and that will be rebadged from the skills nominee. In the arrangements from autumn, we're sharpening our focus on disadvantaged learners and vulnerable learners, and those with SEND. We are making this a key feature of the new framework, and we'll have an evaluation area on inclusion in whole provider level part of the toolkit. And this will be a theme and a consideration running through all the other evaluation areas. I don't think that's a problem for any of you on the call. Further education is about serving those who are disadvantaged and vulnerable. I think it's something that further education and skills providers have always done well. So I think you'll rise, as it were, to that challenge very successfully. We will be changing our evaluation areas, and I'll give you some detail about that on the next slide. Here we are. So you'll have seen this if you'll have looked at our consultation documentation on the gov.uk website, but at a whole provider level, we'll be evaluating leadership, inclusion and safeguarding. Safeguarding remains a binary judgment as it currently is. In colleges, designated institutions, we'll be evaluating the contribution to meeting skills needs, as we do now on what we call enhanced inspections. And for all providers, we will look within each type of provision at curriculum, teaching and training, achievement, and participation and development. So, for example, if you're a provider with 4 provision types, we'll look at the curriculum for apprenticeships. We'll look at the curriculum for EPYP, curriculum for high needs, the curriculum for adult, and that will apply to all those 4 areas there that you see on the screen. We're doing that because we want to give the focus and give a different touch to the provision type areas. They are clearly very different from one another, and we want to recognize that and have a flexible toolkit and methodology that recognizes those differences. On the next slide, here you can see the evaluation areas for ITE providers. I think Andrea said a little while ago that the changes for ITE providers don't come into effect till January 26. So this is a little way further off, but you can see there the proposed evaluation areas: leadership inclusion, curriculum teaching achievement, and then professional behaviours relating to the vocational path, and those things will be inspected at whole provider level. So that's the plan from January 26. Let's have a look then at the toolkit itself. We've mentioned the toolkit. Here you can see an example of it. This is just, as it were, a page pulled out of it. You can see this is for curriculum, which is as I just explained, is a provision type level judgment. You can see that the central column there, secure, is pretty much where we'll start. It's where we begin our inspection activities, and then we work to the left or to the right, depending on what we're finding. So we'll go into your provision, we'll look at the areas, and we'll start exploring to see whether, in fact, what we're looking at is better than secure, less good as secure, and perhaps is attention needed or causing concern. But our starting point will always be in that middle band of secure. The toolkit is broken down into different sections. At the top, you can see the evaluation area, and then in the what are, I suppose, are slightly greyed boxes, the leadership of the curriculum and securing knowledge and skills to access learning and for future learning. Those are evaluation themes. And then the text sections that you see on the screen, we call those the standards. So the toolkit has those kind of, if you like, 3 constituent parts to it. The final end of the curriculum, there's the third evaluation theme for curriculum there. So That's a fairly brisk canter through the proposals to remind you the kind of underpinning priorities for this work and this change. We want to promote professional discussion, professional conversation, collaboration. And I think we're good at doing that in the further education space. I think that's something that we've always done. We've always come out and talked to you as professionals. We come in, and as I was explaining about the secure, we start with the idea that everyone's working within legal expectations and professional frameworks. And we also want to try and filter all our judgments, all our activities through the context of your work. Again, we know very well that further education providers, all the people on this call, work in a huge range of very varied providers with different provision and different learner types. We want to continue to recognise that uniqueness of context that you bring to it in your providers. We want to provide a rounded picture through our reporting and our report cards of what you do and what it's typically like for staff and learners in your setting. And we want to produce, if you like, a balanced set of judgments that recognise that some aspects of what you do will be better and some will be less developed. And we want to promote self-improvement. We want to, support self-improvement, inclusivity, and high and rising standards. So this is change for the better, we hope, and we feel the sector will benefit from this. That's all for me from now. I'll be answering some questions in a minute, I'm sure, but I'll pass you back to Denise. Thank you very much.
In a moment, we'll be moving on to the question and answer part of the evening. But before we do, I have a quick reminder on how you can share your views. We will do our very best to answer as many questions this evening. If we are unable to answer all of the questions, you can have your say. You can see the link to our consultation document here, but you can also make contact with the regional senior HMI and pose any questions to them. We really want your views to help shape our new inspection toolkit and methodology. The only way to have your say is by completing our consultation. Please tell us what you think about our proposals. So our proposed changes for improving the way we inspect education can be found on the gov.uk website. You can submit your views via an online survey, which is our consultation. And a link to the survey is at the top of our web page. Just look for share your views, or you can scan the code, which is right here. And I've seen a number of questions. Yes, we are recording this session, and so you'll be able to access this code after this event. So just scan the code and it'll take you right there. But please remember, the window of opportunity to tell us what you think closes on the 28th of April. So now we move on to the final part of the webinar, your chance to ask any questions you would like. Many of you have already helpfully submitted questions, but please feel free to add anything you would like to know in the question box, and we'll try to answer as many of these as we can. So we've got around half an hour to answer your questions. So as panel members, we will try to be succinct where we can. So remember, our panel members are Andrea Dill Russell, Richard and myself. So without further ado, Anne, please would you tell us the first question?
Thank you. And we have got lots and lots of questions, but do keep them coming. I've tried to find a few main themes because we have got lots of questions. So I think the first question in terms of a timescale would be, can we just clarify, please, panel, the timing of this? When will inspections start using the toolkits? Could you maybe reference also when the consultation closes and whether any changes might be considered after that? I'm going to give you a few questions and you can decide who to answer. For those providers that are expecting an inspection fairly soon, will they be inspected under the current EAF? And what about providers who feel they're due a monitoring visit? What will happen there? So I think there's quite a lot of questions between now and then. So let's start with, when does this start, please?
Okay, I'm happy to answer that. So as I mentioned, the consultation closes on the 28th of April. At the moment, we are conducting what we're calling testing visits. So we're testing the current proposals with volunteer providers, and we're getting feedback from them and from our inspectors. And all of that feedback will be included in the consultation survey feedback. On the 28th of April, that will be closed, and all of that feedback will be analysed and used to inform the next stage of our inspection toolkit and methodology. We are hoping to introduce the new toolkit and methodology from November 25.
Thank you. And for any provider who feels they're in scope for a monitoring visit, will that happen? Will that still happen up to November for re-inspection purposes, or for a new training provider?
Richard, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. Yes, basically. If folk are about to be inspected, they'll be inspected until the close of this academic year. So until the 31st of August, you'll be inspected under the current arrangements. That'll be EIF, the inspection format that you know and love under the EIF, and the monitoring visit format that you know and love currently. As we then move into the new inspection activity that you will come to know and love, post-November, the new arrangements will apply.
Thank you. And I'm going to move us on now to methodology. There's been lots of questions about our proposed or our thinking around methodology at the moment. Lots of questions about deep dives. So in the slides we mentioned about stopping using deep dives, but could the panel maybe give us some thinking around why that decision is included in our current thinking, and what will replace deep dives? What will happen in terms of inspecting English and maths within providers, because questions are acknowledging that they often were a deep dive area. So what's our methodology going to look like?
Shall I begin and then hand over to one of the colleagues? So
Yes, please.
I'll just set the scene. Our EIF evaluation found that inspectors had challenges in gathering evidence through deep dives in some contexts within the time limitations of inspection. So removing deep dives will give inspectors and providers significantly greater flexibility, and more of that time can be used to allow leaders and inspectors to reflect on each provider's unique context and, as we mentioned earlier, their improvement priorities. Inspectors will discuss the most appropriate activities tailored to each specific provider and those improvement priorities. Those activities will typically mirror leaders' improvement priorities. It will give you the opportunity to say, this is something that we're continuing to work on. These are the actions that we've taken. This is the impact we can see is starting to happen. And we'll say, let's go and explore the impact of those actions that you have taken, whether that be since the previous inspection or whether that be as a result of what you've identified yourselves and shared with us. We are doing all of the inspection activities that we currently have in our tool bag. We're continuing with the curriculum intent meeting, visiting workshops, visiting lessons, talking to apprentices and learners, talking to employers, talking to teachers and trainers, having meetings. All of the activities that you recognise, we are continuing to do within this inspection methodology. But we inspectors will be testing out a wide range of those activities as part of the testing visits that we're currently doing with our volunteer providers. And we're also testing out leadership and inclusion learning walks, and we're also talking to many more learners in social settings. So during these testing visits, we're testing out all of the activities that you know and recognise, plus a few more that we know work really well and help us to understand who you are, what are your strengths, and what are your areas for development. And as we've mentioned in the previous slides, we'll be working very closely with you and communicating with you throughout the inspection to ensure that you hear and see what we find during the process.
Thank you. Anybody else want to add anything on to what Denise has helpfully said? No, let's move on because we've got lots of questions. So,
Sorry, Anne, sorry, can I just interrupt? Richard, do you just want to mention something about English and maths, just so that we can clarify that question? Sorry, Anne.
Well, I've now forgotten what the direct question was on the English and maths part of it.
We typically had deep dives in English or maths on inspections. If deep dives are being, we're no longer doing deep dives as a methodological approach, will we still look at English and maths?
Oh, for sure. No reason why not. There's no reason why we wouldn't look at anything we've looked at in deep dives before. But we will look at it within the framework that we're operating under. So we look at it through the lens of the toolkit and the provision type, or the whole provider lens. But English and maths are a fundamental part of any provider's activities, as we know. So we'll still take an interest in those things. They're key qualifications and skills that learners need.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions that I think will just need very quick answers so we can make best use of time. So, Richard, in your slides, you mentioned about we're going to no longer have a skills nominee, but instead we're going to have a shadow nominee. Can you just explain the thinking there and clarify that for all providers that's our proposal for all providers from November onwards?
Yes, it is. I mean, we already have a shadow nominee, as I said, in large and complex inspections and many ILP inspections. We're extending that to all providers as of November. So all inspections and all providers can have a nominee and then a shadow nominee. And the idea behind that is that you are given through that shadow nominee role a chance to, as it were, grow talent in your organization. We often go on inspection and we hear that, person A has been the nominee for the previous 3 inspections. If they go off sick, or if they win the lottery and go to Barbados just before the next inspection, there's a huge gap, a kind of management gap there. So the shadow nominee gives providers a chance to have their nominee, their experienced nominee, but also grow someone into the role.
Thank you.
And we won't be, sorry, I ought to say, for those folk that used to have enhanced inspections, we won't any longer have a skills nominee for those providers, i.e. colleges and designated institutions. We didn't feel it was necessary to continue with that role.
There's also, I'll just pop these in now because they link to what you've just said, Richard. There's been quite a few questions about the skills subjudgment. I'll tell you a few of the points, perhaps you can just answer them. Could you clarify which types of provider? So the GFEs and the sixth form colleges are clear, the designated institutes, and also can you explain why it's sixth form colleges and not academies? And if a sixth form college is academizing, so there's quite a few questions around who's in scope.
Okay. All right, I'll try and do that as briefly as possible. Skills inspection judgments will still apply for general FE and specialist colleges. If you're a college, you'll know that you're a college. They will still apply for sixth form colleges. They will not apply in the case of academized sixth form colleges. It's not our decision, it's a decision of the department. And actually this goes back to legislation. It's in the skills bill and later the Skills Act. It actually sets out the fact that it's sixth form colleges general further education colleges and designated institutions. So if you academise, you escape from the skills judgment, basically. And the skills judgment, as we know, doesn't apply to school sixth forms either. I know that there be many people on the call who are in sixth form colleges who think that it should, but it doesn't, because that's the legislation. So we're only doing what the legislation tells us to do. I think you said something about
designated institutes, that doesn't include ITPs.
No, an independent training provider is not a designated institution. There are only about, I think, I'm reaching for the number in my head, I think it's 18 designated institutions in the country. You'll know if you work in one. They were formerly, a lot of them were adult education institutes. Some of them were specialist art institutes. And other forms of specialist provider and institutes. They've grouped under that name of specialist designated institution. I think it's 18.
That's helpful, thank you. Again, another couple of quick questions. Any changes in the proposed notice period for different types of providers, and any thinking around the duration of full inspections compared to the duration of current inspections?
Richard, do you want to respond to that one?
The tariff, as we call it, which establishes how many inspectors and for how long, is always reviewed. It's reviewed every year, and it particularly will be reviewed in the coming year and coming years because of the spending review, the Treasury spending review. And we also know that the Chancellor was making statements today in the spring statement. We get our money from government. If the government purse is a little bit empty, then we tend to get less money. I mean, that's not rocket science. So therefore, in such situations, we might have to review our tariff and provide fewer people for less time. The proposal is broadly that we stick to the current tariffs as we move into the new inspection arrangements. But as I say, we're not absolutely the masters of that, and we have a Treasury spending review statement to be made fairly soon. But we're hoping that we can secure the current tariffs for the coming year at least. Beyond that, it might be subject to review.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Andrea Shepherd, got a couple of questions about ITE. ITE are currently within the TMV period. When are these due to end? And will all providers who are due an ITE have one before the new inspections happen from January? So and if I could tag on one more to that, somebody has asked the question, is there any provider that may be too small to be in scope for inspection activity? How many ITE trainees do you have to have before you're in scope for an inspection?
Thank you. I'm going to try and take those in the order that you asked, with very short answers. Good. So for the TMV periods, we are carrying out those TMVs. For those of you who don't know what a TMV is, it is a thematic monitoring thematic monitoring visit, and they are taking place during the spring and the summer terms of 2025. And they are being carried out during the period in which we are not carrying out routine inspections of ITE providers. I think, Anne, you asked if every provider would expect to receive a TMV, and the answer to that is no. There will be a selection of providers covering different phases and types of ITE provision, but that won't cover every provider. And I think then the third question was around the minimum number of trainees, and is there anything that is too small?
Yes.
And again, the answer to that is no.
Okay.
It's all to do with the number of trainees who are on one of the designated programmes that are ITE, and whether those trainees are then publicly funded, but there is no minimum number.
And I can see one very recent question has come in saying, will skills judgment apply to HEIs? No, they're not the type of provider that would have a skills subjudgment. Richard, I'm sorry, I'm going to come back to you because some people have put in the chat here that they're not quite clear about the notice period for inspections. So do you mind repeating that part? Are we changing the notice period?
Yeah, we're planning to. Currently, we have a 5 or 6 day notice period for enhanced inspections and a 2-day notice period for other forms of inspection. We are planning that all inspections have the 5/6 day notice period from November. That's something that we heard loud and clear in the big listen, the notice period, and it was a very big shout from large providers, particularly, who said it was very difficult to, I can't think of the technical educational phrase, but get their ducks in order within a 2-day notice period. It's hard to arrange. We recognise that it's hard to arrange things like employer visits for us, and contact with employers, stakeholders, within the 2-day notice period. So we think that probably the 5 or 6 day notice period will apply to everyone in November.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, I'm going to move us on because we've also got lots of questions about aspects of the toolkit. I'm going to start with the one that's perhaps had the most questions, which is inclusion. So could you please, Denise, I'm going to come to you first. Excuse me. Could you talk a little bit more about inclusion? I'm going to quote the questioner. What does this term mean to Ofsted? Can we define which learners are covered by the section on inclusion? And can you talk to us a little bit more about inclusion and in particular those terms vulnerable and disadvantaged?
Yes, I can. Thank you. So we're proposing we include this new evaluation area that focuses very clearly on what we're calling inclusion. Now, there isn't a specific list that has been written by the DFE, and we are talking to DFE and other organisations about this. What we mean by the term disadvantage tends to be learners who are economically disadvantaged. They may be eligible for a bursary, they may be children looked after, care leavers, etc. What we mean by the term learners who are vulnerable are those who face barriers to their learning or well-being. And these tend to be more fluid. They are people who may be experiencing physical or mental health conditions. They may be living new in an area. They may have had a family bereavement. There could be domestic crisis, homelessness, and caring responsibilities. And we will work with the provider, and we're still testing this out through our testing visits, and it's part of our proposal that we ask the provider, who do you deem to be disadvantaged? Who do you deem to be vulnerable? How do you know this? What actions are you taking? And is it helping them to stay on programme and thrive in their studies? And as I think it was Richard mentioned earlier, this is something that the FES sector does exceptionally well. And so we were delighted when the Chief Inspector introduced this aspect, this evaluation area to the toolkit, because we think FES are really going to shine under this heading, because we know, we've all worked in the sector and we've been inspecting the sector for many years. We know this is something that FES does really well. Does that answer all of the parts of the question, Anne?
I think so. I'm just scrolling back through, excuse me, for the questions. So there's actually been some questions as well, which I might go over to Andrea DR, please, as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about the focus on learners with high needs within our toolkit, and maybe give us an example, somebody's put in the chat, maybe a learner who is studying on a transition programme. What would that look like?
Okay, thanks, Anne. I think first it's really helpful just to clarify back to the really extensive list that Denise gave us earlier about all of the activities that we'll be undertaking and actually be sort of testing through the consultation at the moment. So there will always be that focus on teaching, curriculum, achievement and participation development, whether that learner is classified as a high needs learner or a learner with special education needs and disabilities. So I think that's really the first focus to place on. I suppose the key thing is when we talk about learners with EHCPs, it's whether we're going to think of them as learners who are in receipt of high needs funding or not. And if they're in receipt of high needs funding, the provision type for learners with high needs is still part of our toolkit. And obviously, if they have got that EHCP funding, then they'll be graded within that provision type. However, we know quite often we've got learners that have got education, health and care plan that won't be in receipt of high needs funding. And so they may be looked at through either part of our inclusion work, which I think is really positive, because that gives us that broader view of and ability to go and have a look at those learners on different types of courses and in different types of provision. But also if they are, say transition programme to work-based, so if they're on an upper apprenticeship, then if they've not got in receipt of high needs funding, then obviously we will be taking them into consideration as part of the apprenticeship provision type. So it's very much about the individual learner, how they're funding and therefore what courses they're following. But the key thing is whatever course they're on, we're really interested in look at them from our inclusion point of view and that more significant view on vulnerable, disadvantaged and SEND in particular. To answer the question, Anne.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the leadership evaluation area, if I may. I'm very conscious of time. Richard, I wonder if I could ask you, in terms of the toolkit, had a few questions about the role of governors. Is there any implications in our proposed changes about how we might consider the role of governance structures, governance oversight?
By and large, in the round, no massive change there. We'll always talk to governors or those people in an oversight role. I recognise that those folk are not always called governors. They may be a board, they may be an oversight body of some form, and there will be providers. I'm waiting for the comments to come in from people saying we don't have a governance board, I recognise that in some employer providers particularly, there are other types of providers, but some employer providers there isn't anybody really in a governance role. There may be people in a management oversight role, but that's a slightly different thing. It's a difference. But where there is a governance or oversight body, we will continue to talk to them. We won't talk to the whole body because often that's very difficult to give people a chance to speak and contribute. We talk to selected members of that body as we do now. No major change in that respect.
Okay, thank you very much. And I'm going to ask you a question about achievement. So the toolkit evaluation area of achievement currently has some focus on data and performance measures. Can you talk us through a little bit about how that may work? And again, it might be helpful if you could draw on a couple of different types of provider to show how that might work, please.
I mean, basically, look, data tells us some things about provision. We've very often said it tells us one of a number of stories about your provision and about the experience of your learners. It's not the only story, and it's not the only thing we consider. That said, we will be increasing our focus on data and hard performance measures under the new arrangements from November. That's our proposal. But part of that really is to restore a situation that was in place before the pandemic. If you think back to pre-pandemic days, we had a fairly healthy regard for data then. It's just that during the pandemic, data supply and data collection more or less ceased. So we went through a long period where there was actually no data at all collected by the Department for Education or the ESFA, and then it's been returning in different forms ever since the end of the pandemic. So what we're doing, as it were, really is putting the dial back to when we had a good supply of data that told us a good range of things about your performance and about your learners' experiences and successes. As I say, though, it isn't the only thing we look at. It isn't the only story. If it was, we could do this by email.
Okay, thank you very much.
And can I just
So,
add to that? I think
yeah, of course.
that's really, really helpful, Richard. We also recognise that for some of our providers, many of our providers, timely data is something of a challenge. So we will begin with a conversation about what is published and about where you're at now in terms of the data. And as Richard said, it is part of a much wider story. We're really interested in progress. We're looking at standards of both practical and written work. So we will go into all of the detail that we currently go into on EIF, but we're just going to bring back that focus on data now that we know it's more reliable.
Thank you. So we're in our last 4 minutes. So I've got 2 broad themes of questions left to ask. So within the chat, obviously there are lots and lots of people from different types of providers. So I'm going to try and group their questions. So if I am a provider that only offers, for example, skills boot camps, or only offers apprenticeships, or is a small ISC, or only offers adult provision, is it the same toolkit that will apply to each of those scenarios, types of provider? And connected to that, we've also had a few questions. Would you advise, do you feel that such providers, which are very different in what they offer, can use the toolkit themselves to maybe assist or support them on a sort of self-assessment type process? Denise.
Thank you. And colleagues, please add anything that you want to. So the toolkit is designed in this proposal to cover all of the different types of providers that we inspect, and it's broad in FES. What we are developing, and we have not yet published because we're using the testing visits and the feedback that we get from the consultation process to inform this document, but we are replacing the handbook with an operating guide. And in that operating guide, we'll give really specific detail to inspectors about when you inspect an ISC, you need to focus on the toolkit and these things. When you're inspecting adults, and we know there's a whole range of learners that sit under the heading of adults, you use the toolkit plus these things. So we're going to be really clear, and that's where we will be able to develop that context and understanding of each provider type, because we will use the toolkit and the context specific information in the operating guide that we're still developing to inform that inspection. So we will be recognizing much more clearly and in much more detail the differences of the different providers that we inspect, because that's something that we said we would do as a result of the big listen. Does anybody want to add to that?
That's really helpful. Thanks, Denise. Unless anyone does, I think you've answered the question. I'm very conscious of time. So there's also been some questions about the test visits, as you've mentioned, then the pilots. And if I summarise the questions, which are, when do those, will we be publishing what we're finding as we go along? Is there still an opportunity for providers to volunteer to be part of any pilot activity? So perhaps if I just leave it at those 2 points. Thank you.
I'm happy to start.
Okay.
Oh, go on. So yes, once the consultation closes, so there are a number of methods of feedback that we will be using as part of our consultation findings. There's the survey. I know there will be colleagues on the call today who took part in employer provider focus groups, and we've had focus groups with practitioners in FES. and parents. We're also doing webinars such as these. And of course, those colleagues who have volunteered to work with us on the testing visits, we're also gaining feedback from them, both on inspection and after the, well, I shouldn't use the term inspection, both on the testing visit and after the testing visit, where our research and evaluation colleagues are sending surveys out. We're pulling all of that together to inform what will be a response to the consultation process. So there will be a published document that shares the responses that we have had, a bit like we did with the Big Listen. And then internally, we will be using those responses to inform what will be the final version of the methodology and the final version of the toolkit. What was the
We
second
will
one?
not be publishing anything to do with the outcomes or the process relating to individual providers who volunteered for test visits and pilots. Those things are testing activities, and we won't be publishing any reports or any summaries of that relating to any individual provider at all, because we arranged that in confidence with those volunteer providers.
Brilliant. And is there still an opportunity?
Yes, we want still some names for test visits or pilots.
So how would they do that, Richard?
For the autumn? I
Through
think they ought to email you, Anne.
Thank you.
Yeah, email Anne or your regional senior HMI. That's where a lot of the volunteers originated from. So we're keen. In fact, we haven't actually been able to respond positively to all the requests to take part, because we only have so much time and resource, and of course we're continuing with EIF.
There's also the FES policy email address that people can email as well, fes@ofsted.gov.uk.
And there's a very, very good range of providers types on here, offering very different types of provision. So it would be good if anybody does want to kind of put themselves forward. I know there was a couple of questions from employer providers, for example, and that was a similar question to, will the same toolkit apply to them? So I just want to loop back to that and say yes, because you answered that question, Denise.
We're anxious to try and pilot and test in all the different provider types. And we've worked very hard to do that to date, even, and in every corner of the country, small, large, rural, urban. We want to capture as much as we can. So bring it on.
Two final questions. Well, there's loads of questions, but let me ask two quick ones. Prison education, because some of our attendees will have an interest offering the prison education. When will those toolkits and new approach, are there changes there too?
So that's the next phase. Richard, I'm not sure whether we have confirmation of actual date in which we're going to.
No, we haven't yet.
No, but it'll be the next phase of development.
We've always followed with an offender learning tailored framework after every framework change, in living memory, as it were, and it'll come. ITE is coming in January 26. It's possible that offender learning will come then, but as yet, no date decided. We have to, as you can imagine, consult with HMPPS, with HM Inspectorate of Prisons, with the MOJ and various other bodies in that regard.
Final question, can there be another webinar once all the guidance documents and toolkits go live to help explain final documents and, in the words of the questioner, to help to truly understand? So it will have moved from proposals, thinking, to the actual final documents.
No doubt. Yeah, we usually do that sort of stuff.
We usually do. We hope to do that.
Okay. Thank you. Very conscious we've gone over time, Denise, so shall I hand back to you?
Thank you, Anne. Thank you for doing that. And thank you everyone for posing the questions. We really appreciate that. We've overrun, so I'm just going to draw the webinar to a close. Thank you to Richard, Andrea, Anne and Andrea for taking part in tonight's session. We hope that you found the webinar to be useful. I will close the webinar with a final reminder that your views are important to us. We are listening, and please can I encourage you and your staff parents, carers, employers, learners and apprentices to complete our survey. And just a reminder, it is open until the 28th of April. And if we were unable to answer any of your questions and you'd like to pose them to your senior HMI, please do. We will do our very best to answer as many questions as possible. Thank you all for attending, and we hope you enjoy your evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.